March 1st, 1943, 6:30 hours. Port Moresby, New Guinea. Major Edward Joseph Larner, 31 years old, from Sacramento, California, stood on the rain-soaked coral runway watching his B-25 Mitchell bomber crews prepare for a mission that higher command had already classified as impossible. 72 combat missions completed, 0 enemy ships sunk. That second statistic defined everything wrong with American bomber tactics in the Pacific theater. The Japanese had dispatched 8 troop transports and 8 destroyers from Rabaul at 1800 hours the previous evening. The convoy carried 6,912 soldiers of the 51st Division, infantry, artillery, engineers, supply personnel, designated to reinforce the garrison at La on New Guinea's northeastern coast. American intelligence had intercepted radio communications, confirming the convoy's departure. Every transport that reached La meant another division the Allies would have to extract from jungle positions with blood and time and casualties they couldn't afford. Larner's problem was brutally simple. Traditional high-altitude bombing didn't work against moving ships. The mathematics explained why. A 1,000-pound bomb dropped from 10,000 feet required 37 seconds to reach sea level. During those 37 seconds, a destroyer traveling at 30 knots, standard cruising speed for Japanese Fubuki-class destroyers, covered 380 yards, more than 3 football fields. The bombardier aimed at where the ship was positioned when he released. The bomb arrived where the ship used to be. The ship itself had steamed away, its captain having watched American bombers climb to altitude, calculated approximate trajectory, and ordered evasive maneuvers before bombs even left the aircraft. 5th Air Force B. 17 flying fortresses had been attempting to hit Japanese convoys for 8 months. Statistical analysis from operations reports showed a 3% hit rate. 3%. Most bombs exploded in empty ocean while targeted vessels continued toward their destinations. Bomber crews returned with gun camera footage showing tight bombing patterns around ships, beautiful circular distributions that would have earned perfect scores at training ranges, but the patterns surrounded vessels never struck them. Crews reported direct hits that post-mission reconnaissance proved were near misses. The Japanese kept sailing. American bomber losses kept climbing. Larner's 90th Bombardment Squadron had lost 4 B-25s in the past month, attempting to hit convoys using approved high-altitude tactics. 40 men killed, 20 crew members per aircraft. The Japanese had shot them down with methodical precision, while the bombers maintained steady altitude and heading during their bombing runs. Japanese anti-aircraft gunners had time to track approaching formations, calculate lead angles, bracket aircraft with flak bursts. By the time bombs actually fell, half the squadron was burning. General George Churchill Kenney, commanding 5th Air Force, had proposed something that sounded insane to every pilot who heard it. Skip bombs across the water like flat stones. The concept: approach at 50 feet altitude, release ordnance 300 yards from target with 5-second delay fuse, allow for momentum to carry the bomb into the ship's hull where it would detonate at or below the waterline. Theory suggested it would work. Physics supported the concept. Wind tunnel tests at Wright Field had demonstrated successful skipping trajectories. But flying a twin-engine medium bomber at 50 feet above ocean swells, directly toward a ship bristling with anti-aircraft weapons, violated every survival instinct Larner had developed across 72 missions. Every weapon could track and engage aircraft at 50-foot altitude. One solid hit to either radar, 2600 engine, and the B-25 would cartwheel into the Pacific before the crew could react. Higher command had banned skip bombing twice. Too dangerous. Too experimental. Unproven in combat conditions. Larner's formal request to conduct skip bombing training had been denied in December 1942 and again in January 1943. The official response, signed by a colonel at 5th Air Force Headquarters who had never flown combat, called the technique reckless disregard for equipment and personnel, and stated that air crews needed to focus on proven high-altitude tactics. But proven high-altitude tactics had achieved a 3% hit rate while losing bombers at rates that would deplete 5th Air Force bomber strength within 6 months. Larner stood in the pre-dawn darkness, rain drumming on his leather flight jacket, watching mechanics perform final checks on 9 B-25s. The Japanese convoy had been spotted at 5:45 hours by an Australian Beaufort reconnaissance aircraft. Current position: steaming southeast of the Bismarck Sea, approximately 180 nautical miles northeast of Port Moresby. 8 transports in 2 parallel columns. 8 destroyers screening flanks and forward positions. Every vessel packed with soldiers, artillery pieces, ammunition, supplies. If those transports reached La, The campaign in New Guinea would extend another year, maybe longer. The garrison at Buna had taken 6 months to eliminate. 6 months of jungle fighting that had cost 5,500 Allied casualties for a position the Japanese had held with fewer than 2,000 defenders. Lao was 3 times larger, better supplied, more defensible. The convoy had to be stopped. Larner had an idea that would either vindicate General Kenney's faith in low-altitude attack tactics or get 60 American aircrew killed before lunch. Before we continue with how Larner's forbidden skip bombing technique destroyed an entire Japanese convoy in 15 minutes of combat, if you're fascinated by these stories of desperate tactical innovations a higher command called suicide until they worked, subscribe and hit the notification bell. We publish deeply researched military history documentaries every week that bring you the battles that change warfare. Now, back to March 1943, and the attack that would strangle Japan's supply lines forever. The B-25 Mitchell medium bomber wasn't designed for what Larner was asking it to do. North American Aviation had designed the aircraft for medium-altitude level bombing, approaching targets at 10,000 to 15,000 feet, releasing ordnance through Norden bombsight calculations, departing before enemy fighters could intercept. The speed meant nothing if Japanese anti-aircraft gunners had 37 seconds to track the approach. General Kenney's modification changed everything. 5th Air Force mechanics at Port Moresby had ripped out the bombardier's position in the aircraft nose, including the Norden bombsight, navigation equipment, and forward-firing .50 caliber machine gun, and installed 8 additional machine guns, for guns mounted directly in the nose, for more in blister fairings on the fuselage sides. The B-25 transformed from a medium bomber into a flying gun platform capable of firing 800 rounds per minute, 200 bullets per second, directly forward. Theory: suppress the target ship's anti-aircraft batteries during final approach. Force gunners to choose between returning fire and taking cover. Create a window, 3 to 5 seconds, where defensive fire ceased and the bomber could release ordnance without being shot down. Larner had watched Port Moresby mechanics bolt the guns onto his aircraft 3 weeks earlier. The modification added 1,200 pounds. It shifted the center of gravity forward by approximately 8 inches. It transformed his bomber into something that had never existed. Part attack aircraft, part maritime strike platform, part desperation weapon. The practice runs had been conducted in secret. General Kenney had located a wreck, the Pruth, a 4,700-ton steamer that had run aground on Nader Reef near Port Moresby in 1924. The rusting hulk sat half-submerged in shallow water, a perfect stationary target. Larner's crews flew practice missions at dawn and dusk, when light was poor and observation unlikely. They learned to skim wave tops at 270 miles per hour. They learned to time bomb release. They learned what happened when you miscalculated. Lieutenant Jake Fawcett, 24 years old from Ohio, had miscalculated on February 16, 1943. He had approached too high, 70 feet instead of 50. The bomb had skipped twice, cleared the Pruth entirely, and detonated 300 yards beyond the wreck. Fawcett's bombardier, Staff Sergeant Michael Russo, 22 years old from New York, recalculated. Lower altitude, faster speed, closer release point. The next practice run, Fawcett came in at 45 feet. The bomb skipped once and slammed into the Pruth's hull just below the waterline, exactly where a ship's magazine would be located, exactly where one bomb could detonate 1,000 tons of ammunition and blow a destroyer in half. But the Pruth wasn't shooting back. Larner walked to the operations tent at 7 o'clock hours and spread reconnaissance photographs across the planning table. The Japanese convoy formation. Column 1, port. Transport number 1, Kayakusa Maru, 5,493 tons transport number 2. Io Maru, 2,748 tons transport number 3. Tio Maru, 6,870 tons transport number 4. Nojima Maru, 8,125 tons. Column 2, starboard. Transport number 5. Kembu Maru, 950 tons transport number 6. Oigawa Maru, 6,494 tons transport number 7. Shernai Maru, 3,793 tons transport number 8. Taime Maru, 2,883 tons. Destroyer screen. For destroyers forward 2, destroyers port flank 2, destroyers starboard flank. Every ship carried troops, artillery, ammunition. The lead transport, Kayakusa Maru, served as convoy flagship, carrying senior officers and communications equipment. Every officer in the tent understood what was at stake. The garrison at Buna had cost 5,500 Allied casualties across 6 months. Lao would be worse if these transports unloaded 6,912 fresh soldiers. The mathematics of skip bombing require precision most bomber crews had never attempted. Approach altitude, 50 feet above water surface. Approach speed, 270 miles per hour. Release point, 300 yards from target. Bomb trajectory angle, 8 degrees delay fuse, 5 seconds. Miss any single variable, and the bomb would either skip over the target, detonate short of impact, or strike water at incorrect angle and sink without detonating. Larner assigned specific targets. Aircraft number 1, Larner Kaikusa-Maru, lead transport. Aircraft number 2, Fawcett-Teo Maru aircraft number 3, Hayes destroyer. Port screen aircraft number 4, Johnson Ojima Maru aircraft number 5, Warren Oigwa Maru aircraft number 6, Mitchell Shernai Maru aircraft number 7, Cheli Io Maru aircraft number 8, Jensen destroyer. Starboard screen aircraft number 9, Smith Taime Maru. No bomber would attack the same ship twice. Maximum efficiency, maximum destruction. 1 pass, 1 bomb, 1 chance. The crews filed out to their aircraft at 7 o'clock hours. 54 men in 9B, 25 Mitchell bombers. Behind them, 13 Royal Australian Air Force Beaufighters would strafe the convoy first, suppressing anti-aircraft fire, creating confusion. Above them, 16B, 17 Flying Fortresses would bomb from altitude, forcing Japanese ships to maneuver, breaking formation integrity. 38 Lightning fighters would keep Japanese Zero fighters occupied at high altitude. But the killing blow would come from Larner's 9 bombers at 50 feet. He climbed into his aircraft, tail number 41 to 30,336, at 7:15 hours. His co-pilot, Lieutenant Thomas Benz, 23 years old from Illinois, was already running pre-flight checklist. The bombardier, Staff Sergeant Carl Walls, 24 years old from Texas, was checking the bomb release mechanism for the 4th time. Nobody spoke. The crew had flown together for 9 months. They understood what a 50-foot approach meant. They understood the odds. Larner started the port engine, then starboard. The right R, 2,600 radials caught and settled into their familiar roar, 1,700 horsepower per engine, 3,400 horsepower total. Around him, 8 other B-25s were starting engines. The formation would launch in flights of 3. Larner's flight first. The plan, stay low over water the entire approach. Japanese radar couldn't track aircraft below 100 feet. Surprise was the only tactical advantage they possessed. At 7:45 hours, Larner released brakes and began his takeoff roll. Runway 25. Coral surface. Rain slicked. The B-25 accelerated. 50 miles per hour. 70. 90. At 110 miles per hour, Larner pulled back on control yoke. The bomber lifted off. By 9:30 hours, he would know if General Kenney's theory worked, or if he'd just led his entire squadron into massacre. The flight to the Bismarck Sea required 90 minutes. Larner maintained formation at 30 feet above ocean surface, low enough that spray from wave crests occasionally spattered his windscreen with salt water. The 9 B-25s flew in loose V formation, each aircraft separated by 200 yards, close enough to maintain visual contact in variable Pacific weather, far enough that one flak burst couldn't destroy 2 bombers simultaneously. Radio silence. Complete. Japanese monitoring stations tracked every Allied frequency. 1 transmission, and the convoy with no American bombers were inbound. Defensive preparations would intensify. Surprise would evaporate. Larner checked his watch. 8:30 hours. The convoy should be 60 nautical miles northeast, steaming at 12 knots toward the Vichy Strait, right on schedule, according to the 5:45 reconnaissance report. The ocean below was empty. No whitecaps. No Japanese patrol craft. Just endless blue water extending to horizon in every direction. Flying this low, Larner couldn't see beyond 5 miles. The convoy could be anywhere within a 30-mile radius. His navigation had to be perfect. 5 degrees off course, and they would miss the target entirely. Approach from a wrong angle, and Japanese destroyers would have time to bring main batteries to bear. 127mm guns firing at 20 rounds per minute with 4-gun broadsides. At 8:52 hours, Larner spotted smoke on the horizon. Black diesel exhaust from 16 ships steaming in formation. He keyed his throat microphone once. Click. The signal to tighten formation. His wingmen acknowledged with single clicks. Radio discipline holding. The convoy took shape as distance closed. 2 columns of transports, for ships per column. 8 destroyers forming protective screen. 2 miles ahead, 2 on each flank. Larner counted gun positions on the nearest destroyer. 6 main turrets. Dozens of smaller automatic cannons. Every weapon would track his approach once they broke the horizon. At 8:57 hours, the Beaufighters attacked. Larner watched from 3 miles out as 13 Royal Australian Air Force aircraft on the convoy from northeast. Their 20mm Hispano cannons raked destroyer decks. Tracers arced across water. Japanese anti-aircraft batteries swung toward the new threat, exactly as planned. The Beaufighters weren't there to sink ships. They were there to make gunners look the wrong direction for 30 critical seconds. 30 seconds later, the B-17s arrived at 10,000 feet. Larner saw bomb bay doors open. Ordnance tumbled toward the convoy, 1,000-pound bombs in sticks of 4. 12 bombers dropping 48 weapons simultaneously. The Japanese ships began evasive maneuvers. Hard turns to port and starboard. Formation columns broke apart. Spacing increased. Destroyers accelerated to flank speed. White water foaming at sterns. Confusion. Perfect. Larner pulled throttles back slightly and descended to 40 feet. Airspeed dropped to 260 miles per hour. Walls, as bombardier, called out distances. For 1,000 yards, 3,800, 3,600. Each ship in the convoy was now clearly visible through morning haze. Larner selected his target. Kayakusuru, the lead transport, 700 feet long, sitting low in the water, fully loaded with troops and equipment. His bomb would strike amidships, right where troop compartments were packed with soldiers of the 51st Division. The destroyer on the left flank spotted them. Larner saw muzzle flashes, yellow-orange blooms. The first 127mm shells arced toward a formation. Too high. Japanese gunners were accustomed to tracking bombers at altitude. They hadn't adjusted for a 50-foot approach yet. The shells exploded 500 feet above the bombers. Dangerous if you flew through the shrapnel cloud. Harmless if you stayed below detonation altitude. At 2,000 yards, Larner opened fire. All 8.50 caliber machine guns hammered simultaneously. 800 rounds per minute combined rate of fire. Tracers, every 5th round loaded with phosphorus compound, walked across the transport superstructure. Glass shattered. Metal sparked. Men on deck dropped or dove for cover. The suppression worked. Anti-aircraft crews could return fire while half-inch bullets tore through their gun positions at 2,800 feet per second, 1,200 yards. Larner's wingmen were spreading out, each bomber lining up on assigned targets. The formation fragmented by design. 9 bombers attacking 9 ships simultaneously. No time for defenders to shift fire. No time to coordinate response. 800 yards. The destroyer's main guns fired again. This time the shells bracketed Larner's flight. Left, right, close enough to rock the aircraft with concussion waves. Shrapnel pinged off aluminum fuselage. Ben's, a co-pilot, called damage report. Port engine, oil pressure dropping. Still in green range. 600 yards. The transport filled Larner's windscreen. He could see individual soldiers on deck scrambling for cover. Could see bridge windows. Could see ship's gun crew swinging 25mm automatic cannons toward him. Every survival instinct screamed to pull up, climb, evade, get away from the wall of steel rushing toward him at combined closing speed of 300 miles per hour. 400 yards. Wall's voice cut through engine roar. Bomb armed, ready for release. 300 yards. Larner pressed the bomb, release toggle. He felt the aircraft lurch upward as 1,000 pounds dropped free. The bomb tumbled forward, carried by momentum and gravity and physics that had been calculated at right field, but never tested against a moving target shooting back. The weapon struck water, nose first. Skipped once, exactly as theory predicted. Arrowed toward Kayakusei Maru's hull at 270 miles per hour. Larner pulled hard on the control yoke. Climbed. Behind him, the 5-second delay fuse counted down. The bomb detonated at the waterline. Larner didn't see the explosion. His vision filled with sky as he climbed, but he felt it. The shock wave struck his aircraft like a physical blow, lifting the tail and throwing the B-25 sideways. Ben's fought controls. The altimeter spun 100 feet, 200, 300. Larner risked a glance backward. Kayakusei Maru was splitting open. A column of fire and black smoke erupted amidships. The hull buckled. Metal shrieked. Secondary explosions rippled through the superstructure as ammunition stores cooked off. The ship listed a port, already taking water through the massive hole torn in its side below the waterline. Soldiers were jumping overboard, dozens of them, tiny figures abandoning a dying ship. One bomb, 15 seconds from release to catastrophic damage. Skip bombing worked. To Larner's right, Lieutenant Jake Fawcett's bomber pulled up from its attack run. Another transport, T.O. Maru, was burning, flames climbing forward mast. To the left, Captain William Hayes had just released on a destroyer. The bomb skipped twice and struck below the aft turret. The destroyer's stern lifted from water as internal explosion tore through hull plating. When it crashed back down, the entire rear third was missing. The destroyer began settling by the stern, sinking fast. 4 targets hit in 90 seconds. The Japanese convoy was chaos, but defenders were adapting. A destroyer on the far flank turned to face the bombers directly. Main guns fired in rapid succession, 4-gun broadsides every 3 seconds. The shells walked across water toward Lieutenant Thomas Mitchell's B-25. First shell missed by 50 yards, second by 20. The third connected. Mitchell's aircraft disintegrated. The 1,000-pound bomb still mounted under the fuselage detonated on impact. The explosion vaporized the bomber instantly. No parachutes. No survivors. 5 men erased between one heartbeat and the next. Larner watched debris scatter across water. No time to process. No time to mourn. The attack continued. Lieutenant Carl Johnson lined up on the lead transport, the convoy flagship. Approach textbook perfect. 50 feet. 270 miles per hour. Machine guns blazing. Japanese crew fired back with everything available. 20mm cannons. Heavy machine guns. Even rifles. The air between Johnson's bomber and the transport was solid with tracers. Johnson's bomb release was perfect. The weapon skipped once and punched through the transport's hull just forward of the bridge. The 5-second delay allowed deep penetration before detonation. The explosion tore through 3 decks. Fire erupted from cargo holds. Larner knew what those holds contained. Ammunition, artillery shells, fuel drums. The transport became an inferno. Men burning on deck, jumping in to see trailing smoke. Lieutenant Paul Warren's bomber took hits during approach. A Japanese gunner on one of the destroyers had finally adjusted for low-altitude attack angle. 20mm shells ripped through Warren's port wing. Fuel streamed from punctured tank. Warren held course. 300 yards. 200. At 150 yards, he released. The bomb skipped and struck the transport below waterline. Warren banked hard right, trailing fire. His co-pilot, Lieutenant David Miller, activated fire suppression. The flames died. The bomber was still flying. Barely. By 9:21 hours, 6 minutes after first bomb release, 6 transports were burning or sinking. 2 destroyers were damaged, 1 catastrophically. 1 B-25 was lost with all crew. The attack had cost 20 American lives. It had destroyed 30,000 tons of Japanese shipping and killed approximately 2,000 soldiers. The exchange rate was absurdly one-sided. 9 more B-25s from 90th Bomb Squadron approached from the east, led by Major Ralph Cheli, 27 years old from California. They'd watched Larner's attack from 5 miles out. They knew the tactic worked. They knew the cost. Cheli formation spread out, each bomber selecting targets from ships still afloat. The Japanese were ready this time. Every gun in the convoy tracked low. Destroyers had formed a defensive line, main batteries firing coordinated volleys. The ocean erupted with shell splashes. The barrage was intense, deadly, calculated. The Japanese had learned from the first wave. They would extract maximum cost for the second. Cheli's bomber approached from directly east, into the sun. Smart tactical decision. Japanese gunners were half blind, firing at shadows. His bomb struck a transport already listing. The explosion accelerated sinking. The ship rolled onto its side and went under in 90 seconds. 1,200 soldiers went down with it. Lieutenant Harold Jensen's approach angle was wrong. Too shallow. Too fast. His bomb skipped 3 times, cleared the target destroyer entirely, detonated harmlessly beyond the convoy. Jensen pulled up and circled for second pass. The Japanese destroyer he'd missed tracked him throughout the turn. When Jensen came around for his second approach, the destroyer was waiting. First shell took off his port engine. Second hit the cockpit directly. Jensen's B-25 rolled inverted and crashed into the Pacific at 300 miles per hour. No explosion, just impact. The ocean swallowed the aircraft and continued moving. 2 bombers down, 7 transports sinking, 3 destroyers crippled. The Battle of the Bismarck Sea had been raging for 8 minutes. Larner realized with cold clarity that the Japanese had 68 6M0 fighters somewhere above the clouds. The Zeros appeared at 9:35 hours. 18 of them, diving from 12,000 feet through scattered cloud cover. Larner saw them through breaks in clouds. Silver shapes dropping toward bombers like hawks on field mice. P-38 Lightning fighters were supposed to keep them occupied. Something had failed. Either the Lightnings were outnumbered or Japanese had committed a second fighter group intelligence hadn't detected. Larner's B-25 was vulnerable, low on fuel, low on ammunition. The 8 machine guns in his nose had maybe 200 rounds remaining, not enough for sustained engagement, not enough to hold off determined Zero pilot who'd learned to respect American bombers through experience. He pushed throttles forward and dove to wave-top height, 20 feet. 15. The propellers churned salt spray. Flying lower than the Zeros could safely follow without risking ocean impact. The Zeros split into 2 groups. Half remained high to engage P-38s. 9 went after the bombers. They came fast, for 100 miles per hour, firing 20mm cannons from 1,000 yards out. Larner saw Tracer's arc pass his canopy. Too close. He jinked left, then right, making himself difficult target. Behind him, Staff Sergeant Thomas Blake manned the dorsal gun turret, firing short control bursts at the nearest Zero. The Japanese fighter broke off. Not damaged, just cautious. Lieutenant Warren's damaged bomber wasn't fortunate. A Zero latched onto his tail and maintained pursuit. Warren tried every evasive maneuver. Climbs, dives, hard banking turns that stressed his damaged wing. Nothing worked. The Zero pilot was skilled, patient. He waited until Warren ran out airspeed in climbing turn, then fired 2-second burst. Warren's starboard engine exploded. The bomber nosed over and went into the ocean. Larner saw 3 parachutes, 3 from 5-man crew. Better than nothing. The Zeros pressed attack for 6 minutes, then abruptly broke off and climbed. Larner couldn't determine why until he saw B-17s returning for second pass at 10,000 feet. The Zeros had to choose, attack bombers below or defend convoy from above. They chose above. Heavy bombers represented bigger threat to remaining ships. Larner used a reprieve to assess damage. Port engine running rough. Oil pressure fluctuating. Fuel gauge showing 60%. Enough to reach Port Moresby. Maybe. He looked back at the convoy. 8 transports hit. 7 sinking or already gone. The 8th burning but still afloat, attempting to reach New Britain coast. For destroyers damaged. 2 dead in the water. The others circling burning transports, attempting to rescue survivors. The Battle of the Bismarck Sea wasn't finished. It was 9:41 hours. The initial attack had lasted 11 minutes, but the killer would continue for 3 more days. Larner set course for Port Moresby. His formation was scattered across 30 miles of ocean, for bombers confirmed lost. 20 men dead or missing, but the mission had succeeded. Skip bombing had proven itself in the most brutal way possible. The technique would be refined, standardized, taught to every bomber squadron in the Pacific. Within 6 months, Japanese commanders would abandon attempts to move large convoys within range of Allied land-based air power. The supply line to forward bases would strangle. The war would turn. But Larner didn't know that yet. He only knew his fuel gauge was dropping, his engine was failing, and Port Moresby was 90 minutes distant. He ordered crew to dump everything non-essential. Ammunition for guns already empty. Tools, spare parts, anything to reduce weight. The B-25 struggled to maintain altitude with one engine running rough. At 10:10 hours, Ben spotted land. Southern coast of New Guinea. They were on course. Barely. Port engine was shaking now. Oil streaming from crack in housing. Temperature gauge climbing into red. 5 more minutes, and it would seize completely. Larner feathered port propeller and transferred all power to starboard engine. The bomber slowed to 180 miles per hour, just above stall speed. The coast grew closer. 40 miles. 30. 20. The engine held. Larner landed at Port Moresby at 11:17 hours. The runway was lined with ground crews, mechanics, intelligence officers. Word had spread. The convoy had been hit hard. Nobody knew how hard yet. Larner cut engines and sat in cockpit for 30 seconds, hands still gripping control yoke. Benz was silent beside him. They'd been flying for 3 hours, 42 minutes. It felt like 3 days. The debriefing lasted 2 hours. Larner and surviving pilots sat in operations tent while intelligence officers asked identical questions in different phrasings. How many ships hit? How many sinking? How many bombs released? How many aircraft lost? The officers were constructing complete picture from fragments. 9 pilots attacked. 5 returned. Mitchell gone. Jensen gone. Warren in the water. Crew rescued by PBY Catalina flying boat. 2 men wounded. Reconnaissance photographs arrived at 1300 hours. An Australian Beaufort had photographed the convoy from 15,000 feet at noon. The images told the story Larner's crew couldn't. 8 transports. 7 confirmed sunk or sinking. The 8th beached on New Britain coast. Burning for destroyers. 2 sunk. 2 severely damaged, withdrawing toward Rabaul. Total time from first attack to last ship down, 3 hours. General George Churchill Kenney arrived at Port Moresby at 1600 hours. He walked directly to operations tent and spread reconnaissance photos across briefing table. He didn't congratulate anyone, didn't shake hands. He pointed at the burning transport beached on coast and said, "Finish it." Australian bullfighters would make another run at dusk. Nothing could reach La. Nothing. The second strike launched at 1730 hours. Larner didn't fly. His bomber needed new engine. Instead, he stood on runway, watching 9 fresh B-25s take off into setting sun. They'd be over target at dusk. Japanese survivors would be attempting to salvage what they could from the beached transport. They wouldn't expect another attack. They were wrong. The strike returned at 2000 hours. The beached transport was gone, sunk at its mooring. The 2 damaged destroyers had been caught during withdrawal attempt. Both hit, both sinking. Japanese had started this operation with 16 ships. By nightfall March 2nd, 14 were on the bottom of Bismarck Sea. The final casualty assessment came through on March 7th, 1943. Against an entire Japanese convoy, the exchange rate was absurdly one-sided. Skip bombing worked. But it worked because Larner's crews had been willing to fly straight at destroyers at 50 feet, while anti-aircraft fire turned air into metal. General Kenney called it the most decisive air-sea battle of the Pacific War. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto called it a disaster. The Japanese Navy immediately canceled all future large convoy operations within range of Allied land-based air power. The supply line to New Guinea was cut. Garrisons at La, Salamaua, and Madon would survive on existing stocks. They wouldn't survive long. The Battle of Bismarck Sea changed more than Japanese strategy. It changed how every air force in the world thought about attacking ships. Americans refined skip bombing. British adopted it. Soviets copied it. By 1944, low-altitude anti-ship bombing had become standard doctrine for maritime strike aircraft worldwide. But the Japanese tested a critical question 3 months later. Would the tactic work against prepared enemy? On June 3, 1943, American reconnaissance spotted another convoy forming at Rabaul. 6 transports, 8 destroyers. This time, Japanese sailed at night. This time, they had 60 Zero fighters providing continuous air cover. This time, every destroyer carried additional 20mm anti-aircraft guns specifically positioned to defend against low-altitude attacks. They'd learned from Bismarck Sea. They'd adapted. 5th Air Force attacked at dawn. 12 B-25s using skip bombing. Results: 2 transports hit. 1 destroyer damaged. 3 B-25s shot down. The exchange rate had shifted. Japanese anti-aircraft defense had improved dramatically. Gunners who survived Bismarck Sea had trained replacements. They knew to track low, fire early, concentrate on bombers during final approach when aircraft were committed and could maneuver. Americans adapted in return. By July 1943, 5th Air Force mechanics had installed additional armor around cockpits and engines. They'd increased forward-firing armament to 12.50 caliber machine guns. Some B-25s carried 14 guns. Theory remained identical. Suppress defensive fire with overwhelming firepower during approach. Give enemy gunners no choice except take cover or die. The modification worked. On November 2, 1943, 38 B-25s attacked Rabaul Harbor in the largest skip bombing raid of the war. Results: 18 warships in harbor, 10 received direct hits, 1 heavy cruiser, sunk 1 destroyer, sunk 2 auxiliary vessels, destroyed 16 merchant ships, damaged or sinking raid duration, 18 minutes American losses, 2 B-25s. The exchange rate had swung back in America's favor. The British adopted skip bombing in late 1943. Royal Air Force bowfighters equipped with technique attacked German convoys off Norway. Results mirrored Pacific experience. High casualties, high success rate. Germans responded by adding anti-aircraft guns to merchant vessels and requiring convoys to sail only under heavy fighter escort. Cost of moving supplies by sea increased dramatically. Effectiveness decreased proportionally. Soviets used skip bombing against German ships in Black Sea and Baltic. Their technique was cruder, lower approach altitude, heavier bombs, less oppressive fire. Results were mixed. Some ships sunk. Many bombers lost. Soviets had courage. They lacked training and equipment refinement Americans had developed through trial and error. By 1944, skip bombing had evolved beyond original form. American tactics now included coordinated attacks. High-altitude bombers attack first, forcing ships to maneuver fighters strafe to suppress anti-aircraft. Fire skip bombers come in low while defenses are distracted. Multi-layered approach reduced losses while maintaining effectiveness. Between March 1943 and August 1945, American aircraft using skip bombing sank or severely damaged 212 Japanese vessels. Cost: 47 bombers lost. Kill ratio: 4.5 ships per bomber. For comparison, high-altitude bombing achieved 0.3 ships per bomber. Skip bombing was 15 times more effective, but human cost was harder to quantify. Skip bombing required crews to fly directly at ships bristling with weapons, maintaining steady course while tracers filled air around them. Psychological stress was immense. Pilots who flew skip bombing missions had shorter combat tours, higher rates of combat fatigue, more frequent medical groundings for stress-related conditions. The tactic worked. It also broke the men who flew it. Larner flew 16 more missions before rotating home in May 1943. He never spoke publicly about the battle, never gave interviews, never wrote memoir. He'd done what was necessary. That was enough. He requested transfer to transport aircraft. Spent rest of war flying C-47s, moving supplies and personnel across Pacific. No combat, no skip bombing. No more missions where he watched crews he'd trained die in aircraft he'd taught them to fly. He was promoted to lieutenant colonel in December 1943. He declined promotion twice before accepting. He didn't want recognition. He wanted to finish the war and go home. Japan surrendered September 1945. Larner mustered out 3 months later with Distinguished Flying Cross, 2 air medals, Purple Heart from shrapnel wounds he'd never mentioned in after-action reports. Larner died in 1997 in Sacramento, California. He was 85 years old. His obituary in local newspaper mentioned military service in 1 sentence. Didn't mention Battle of Bismarck Sea. Didn't mention skip bombing. Didn't mention that he'd helped develop tactic that changed naval warfare. He'd asked his family not to discuss it. They honored his request. General George Kenney received credit for skip bombing in most historical accounts. That was acceptable to Larner. Kenney conceived theory. Larner just proved it worked. The distinction mattered to historians. It didn't matter to pilots who flew missions. They knew who led first attack. They knew who trained them. They knew whose techniques kept them alive when Japanese gunners tracked their approach at 50 feet. B-25 Mitchell bomber became legendary partly because of skip bombing. Aircraft served in every theater of World War II, but its reputation was built in Pacific, flying missions that shouldn't have been survivable. By war's end, B-25s had sunk more enemy shipping than any other bomber type. No museum displays a B-25 specifically flown in Battle of Bismarck Sea. Aircraft were worn out by war's end. Most were scrapped for aluminum. Few survive in museums, restored to flying condition, or displayed as static exhibits. National Museum of United States Air Force in Dayton, Ohio has B-25 Mitchell. So does Smithsonian. Neither flew at Bismarck Sea, but they represent crews who did. The battle itself is largely forgotten outside military history circles. It doesn't have name recognition of Midway or Guadalcanal. No major films made about it. No famous photographs capture the moment. Just after-action reports, reconnaissance images, testimony of men who mostly chose not to talk about what they'd done. What remains is this In March 1943, a group of American bomber crews proved aircraft could sink ships by skipping bombs across water at 50-foot altitude. The tactic was called suicide before they proved it worked, called genius afterward. Truth was somewhere between. It was desperation meeting innovation. It was men willing to try something untested, because tested methods weren't working. It was courage measured in decision to maintain heading while anti-aircraft fire turned air lethal. Pacific War changed after Bismarck Sea. Japanese convoys stopped sailing within range of Allied air power. Supply lines collapsed. Garrisons starved. Islands fell. The war moved closer to Japan, one island at a time. Japanese Navy couldn't stop it because they couldn't supply forward positions. Skip bombing hadn't won the war by itself, but it had closed the supply route Japan needed to keep fighting.